Hi, and welcome to Quilt Street. I'm Mary Kate Carpetras, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to make the log cabin block. You have undoubtedly seen log cabin quilts in your time. It is one of the most iconic patchwork designs out there. You've seen them throughout time. This pattern dates back a few hundred years. Its exact origins are somewhat under discussion, but all we know is that it is so highly associated with American patchwork. And the wonderful thing about it is it's very easy. And it is also something that you can customize to suit any taste. We'll get into that a little bit later. But right now, let's take a look at the block that I have here in front of me. This was made with, as you can tell, pretty modern fabrics. And this is a very traditional layout in terms of the value. So I want you to think about value right now, which means light, medium, dark, and how those values play against each other. This is really how you make a log cabin quilt sing, is by really paying attention to the value more so than the color. And that's what I did with this block. Is I had this collection of adorable fabrics and I broke them out by value. Half of the block dark and half of the block kind of mediumish light, right? And in the center, I have this coral colored fabric. The reason for that is that in a traditional log cabin block, you usually will see a red patch in the dead center. And it's said, this might be one of those quilt legends, but it is said that that red patch represents the hearth or the fireplace at the home, at the center of the home, right? So I'm not working with red today. I'm working with this nice coral. So that's what I did there. And then I built my block out in counterclockwise fashion, and I'll show you how that works. The thing about a log cabin block is you can't sew it in units. Now, some blocks, we might have you sew a few of these units, set them aside, sew a few of these units, set them aside, gather up a couple of other patches, and then you put them together. That's not how this block works. You're going to have to join each patch individually. The efficiency comes in when you're making a lot of blocks for one quilt, because then you can just assembly line it, right? You're just joining the same types of patches and zoom, 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 snip, 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 press, 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 press. You're going to spend a lot of time pressing with this block, and then you go on to the next step in the block. So let's take a look at what these patches look like when they're laid out and not joined yet. And that's what we have here. So as you can see, it's expanded quite a bit. There's a lot of seam allowances going on in this block, and that is something also for you to pay attention to. I would recommend checking your 1/4-inch seam allowance before you start piecing. It'll be time well spent because, especially with this block that we've written in our pattern for, this finishes at 9 inches, which means that these strips are logs, call them logs. These finish at 1 inch. So you've got a lot of seam allowances going on with some fairly narrow strips, right? Check that 1/4-inch seam allowance. Make sure that your pieces are finishing at the correct width before you start making your blocks. You'll be happy you did. It might look, based on this layout, that somehow you could join these patches and these patches, and kind of mush them together. It's not how it works. Again, you're going to have to work counterclockwise and one at a time. So the way it starts is, I'll point it out here and then I'll show you with some samples. You're going to start by joining these 2 center squares. So you start with the heart of the home right here, and you're going to have another patch, the same dimensions. You're going to join those 2 together. And then you're going to join a patch that is equal in length to these 2 when they're joined. And then you're going to join this and then this, and you're going around and around and around and around. And where she stops, that's up to you to decide. With us, we're making a 9-inch block. So let's take a look at how that goes. So again, you've got this little unit. Those are just those 2 little squares joined there. And then you're going to join the next patch, which is down below, right? Again, they line up. So this patch was cut at 1.5 by 2.5 inches. It'll finish at 1 inch by 2 inches, 1/2 inch for seam allowances. And then, now we're into our dark fabrics. We're working around. So here, this patch down below and this patch here to the right, they're the same dimension. So what you're going to do is you're actually going to be joining, or you're going to be cutting one patch of each size from your two different values, with an exception. You're only going to cut a small patch from your one value, and you're going to cut the final log, the final full-sized log from one fabric, one value. But other than that, you're kind of cutting your patches in pairs. So then these two are the same. And then what I did for this little sample is I joined the next two logs. Again, these are both the same size. And these would be 3.5 inches. And then you just keep adding around, one after the other, and you go around and around. As I said, you do need to press each time. That's really important. So again, I'll point it out here. Zoop, around to the dark, to the light, dark, light, dark, light, and dark. You might notice that what I did is I cut my patches in pairs, or I cut adjoining logs from the same print so that you get a continuous look there. Again, that you could make it really scrappy. I do want you to think in terms of value. If you're just starting out with log cabin, think about it in those terms. But it can be a great stash buster as well. So that's a lot of fun. I do have one tip that I want to share. Take a lot of time, be very careful with your cutting, because that's going to really help you as you're joining your patches. So be very specific about cutting those logs, exactly the dimensions in the pattern. And then when you're joining your units, you might find, as I'll just use this as an example, even if you've checked your seam allowance and you've cut your patches nice and precise, you might still find that your units, your block, it kind of wants to pull in a little bit as you're stitching. That's normal. It'll happen. That's how fabric behaves sometimes. What I want you to do is trust your cutting. So what you would do is you would join the next strip down below. And if you were finding that it wasn't lining up quite exactly and that this log down here is extending past the boundaries or the edges of the unit, you're going to trust the patch that hasn't been joined yet. And you're going to, this is what I did, flipped my unit onto the log that I was about to add, pin it, and just sort of gently encourage it. Just encourage it to kind of meet at the edges. If you're off by 1/4 of an inch or more, then there are perhaps more problems at play. But if it's just a little bit on either side, trust the patch that you cut, kind of give it just a little stretch, nothing too vigorous, pin it in the center, and you'll be amazed that your cutting will encourage the block to kind of relax into the dimensions it was meant to be. It really does work. And that is it when it comes to making a log cabin block. And after that, the possibilities are endless. As I said, you really can customize this for any taste. I firmly believe that if you want to make a quilt for somebody and you're not quite sure, what their style is or, what they would appeal to them, start with a log cabin. You can make it very modern. You can make it very traditional, very artsy. You can also increase the math. If you're comfortable doing that, you can increase the width of your logs, which will in turn increase the length. And for the same amount of sewing, basically, you can get a block that's easily twice as big as this. If I had used 2.5 inch strips, pre-cut strips to make this, this would be an 18-inch block, right? Because this is a 9-inch block finished. If I had started out with 2.5 inch strips, these logs would finish at 2 inches, and I'd have a pretty massive block. All you need are 9 of those, and you've got yourself a great throw quilt. It's so much fun. They're so appealing. And once you make your blocks, you can play with their orientation, kind of figure out different designs. As I said, the possibilities are endless. Have fun, make a log cabin. Every quilter should at least make one log cabin in their lifetime. So now's the day. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you in the next video.